Michael Murray es un historiador convertido en mercadólogo. Ha trabajado con marcas como Pernod Ricard, AkzoNobel e Inc. Actualmente es un mercadólogo en Picasso Labs, seleccionada como una de las compañías de marketing más innovadoras de Unilever en 2016, enseñando a sus colegas cómo hablar con los CMO sobre las últimas.
Hello? Whoa. You know, I realized that you could have just said that I like to sing in the shower and wear dresses, and I have no idea. I'd be like, yeah, that's me. So, yeah, it works. I'm here today to talk to you about big ideas and the business of creativity. Now, I'm not checking my emails, I've got notes on here as well. So I've actually asked a couple of people here what I could do this weekend after this conference. And besides telling me that I should not go for a walk, I should not go outside, that the colonial town is nice. Now me not knowing what to do tomorrow is just bad planning. But if I were to ask you guys what to do in 5 years' time or 10 years' time, you'd probably think I was a little bit crazy, because everything will have changed. Now, to really drive home why we are unable to think about the future, and why when it comes to big ideas and creativity, it can be so hard to find the big idea, I want to do a thought experiment. I know you guys have some reluctance at putting your hands up, but we'll go for it anyway. So, imagine the year is 2500, and you can pick any character in history. You could paint the Mona Lisa, build the pyramids, maybe invent Facebook. Who would you choose to be? Now, I want you to raise your hand if you chose somebody in the past. No? So a couple of you. The thing that stops us from being able to think about the future and put ourselves there is a thing called familiarity bias. It's one of 188 other cognitive biases that act as filters through which we see the world and experience reality. Now, what I find interesting is that maybe some of you would like to be born in the future and would like to see what would happen. But for the most part, we're reluctant to think that far ahead. See, there is no doubt that... What? It keeps touching my mouth. Yeah? All right. So there is no doubt that we are living in a time of exceptional innovation. And what we need to do is get better at expanding our own imagination and our capabilities to navigate the far future, which is coming soon. So we need a little bit of art and science to know what we don't know. What we need is future literacy. You see, we use the future every day. We predict, we fear, we hope. Anticipation is a powerful force shaping what we know about the future, what we see and what we do. Come on. Is that better? Can you hear me now? That's better? Alright, cool. I'm not going to start from the beginning. I'll keep going. So, what exactly is future literacy? You see, future literacy is a capability. It's a skill that allows us to better understand our role and the role that future plays in what we see and what we do. You see, future literacy is important because imagining the future is what generates hope and fear. It gives us sense and sense-making. It gives us meaning. You see, the futures we imagine drive our expectations, our disappointments, and our willingness to invest or to change. So why am I bringing this up? Whoa, they did say it was sensitive. So I'm bringing this up now because we're here today to talk about how brands can make use of our skills as marketers and how we can help identify the trends and subjects and situations that matter to our consumers. We're here today to determine what strategies are effective to identify how to be a trend for your users. You see, to articulate these trends, we need future literacy. We need to break biases and challenge our own assumptions of what the world is and can be, because we are not very good at reacting to change, to technological advancements. You see, we latch onto stories about things that appeal to our own idea of the world, even if they're incorrect. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Tom Goodwin's work. So Tom Goodwin works for Zenith, a publicist company. And he was famous for saying back in 2015 that Uber, the world's largest taxi company, owns no vehicles. And Facebook, the most popular media owner, creates no content. Alibaba, the most valuable retailer in the world, has no inventory. Now, somebody didn't do their research and reposted this 3 years later, but the truth is that this isn't the case. We latch on to these ideas because we think that that is true, even if they appear to be correct. You see, I think we need to get better at thinking a little bit different. See, we have so much information at our disposal, and there's more information than ever before. But we need a little bit of creativity to actually see the world for it is. You see, I've lost my place. So this advert is one of my favorite adverts. This is Volkswagen Beetle's 1950 advert released by DDB. This is a fantastic advert for the sole reason that when they entered the market in America, they had to do something that nobody had done before. They had to change what a status symbol was. They had to redefine a car so that it appealed to everybody at a time where cars represented power, they represented masculinity. So what did they do? They were incredibly honest. They flipped the conversation on their head. And they said that we are not the fastest car, we are not the biggest car, but for that reason, we are special. You see, what happens when you are able to flip the conversation on your head and challenge people to view the world in a slightly different way? You can actually challenge people to see the world in a slightly different way. And I think this is incredibly important to do because at the moment we are living at a time of incredible change. And that change that's just around the corner is getting harder, is getting faster and faster. And one of the reasons why we need to get better at challenging our own assumptions is because forecasting is hard. Now, I don't know if you guys can see this in the back, but all of these lines are the forecasts for each year there is a new forecast for how many electric vehicles will be sold. And as you can see, there is huge discrepancy between all of the forecasts. Now, you see, at the moment, we are living at a time, we are living on the edge of change comparable to the rise of human life. So what does it feel like to stand here? You see, it seems like a pretty intense place to be standing, but then you have to realize, standing on a time graph, you can't see what's to your right. So here's how it actually feels like to be standing here. Now, to really get to grips with how monumental the change around the corner could be, I think we need to imagine that we have a time machine. And we go back 250 years to the 1750. And we take a person from that time, a time where the world's fuel was hay. And if you wanted to speak to somebody really far away, you had to shout or fire a cannon. Now, if you take that person and bring them here, you could break them. You could literally break their imagination because they wouldn't have the words to describe what they are seeing. You would have massive towers and spaceships flying all around. You'd have magic boxes with dragons and white walkers, little devices like this that allow you to see and speak to people on the other side of the world. Now, if that same person wanted to do the same, he'd have to go back 12,000 years to a time where there was no concept of inside, where there were no huge cities. And if that same person wanted to do the same again, he'd have to go back 100,000 years to a time where there was no fire, or a language itself hadn't even been invented. You see, this pattern of human history progressing quicker and quicker as time goes on is what futurist Ray Kurzweil calls the law of accelerating returns. Now, these symbols, the first one on the end here, on my right, is the agricultural revolution, which happened 8,000 years ago. Moving a little bit forward into history, just 210 years ago, we had the Industrial Revolution. Yep. That's not my laptop. Perdón. Do you need a charger? Hello? You want a charger, yeah? I don't know. It's fine, it's still on. Let me know when we're good, yeah? I'll continue, sorry. So just yeah, the pointer's not working. It's not working. Oh, no, there we go. 22 years ago, we landed a person on the moon. And then 9 years later, the gap between the agricultural revolution and the industrial revolution was 8,000 years. The gap between the industrial revolution and landing the first person on the moon was 210 years. The gap between landing a person on the moon and developing the internet was just 22 years. And the time between landing a person on the moon, or creating the internet, and sequencing the first human genome was just 9 years. Now, it can be very difficult to think about the future and imagine the future. And there are three main reasons why, when it comes to forecasts of the future, we tend to be very skeptical and very doubtful. The first is that when we think in history, we tend to think in straight lines as opposed to exponentially. To put this into perspective, if we were to think about the next 30 years, we would typically use the last 30 years as a way of thinking about the future. Now, this isn't the case. You see, when we think about the extent to which the world has changed in the 21st century, we might take the 20th century progress and just add it to the year 2000. But in order to think about the future correctly, you need to imagine things moving far faster than they are now. And the second reason is that the trajectory of very recent history often tells a distorted story. So if you look at only very recent history, what you'll find is that the part of the S-curve that you're on at the moment can obscure your understanding of the future and just how fast things are advancing. You see, the chunk of time between 1995 and 2007 saw the explosion of the internet, the introduction of Microsoft, Google, and Facebook into the public consciousness, the birth of social networking, and the introduction of cell phones and smartphones. See, that was the phase 2 of the S-curve, period of rapid growth. But 2008 to now has been somewhat slower. And we're just about to enter 2020, which could in fact be a new huge phase 2 growth spurt. Now, the third reason is that our own experience makes us stubborn old men about the future. So you see, we base our ideas about the world on our personal experience. And that experience has ingrained the rate of growth of the recent past in our heads as the way things happen. You see, we're also limited by our imagination, which takes our experience and uses it to conjure future predictions. But often what we know simply doesn't translate or give us the tools to simply think accurately about the future. You see, if I were to tell you that in the future we'd be able to mine the moon, or put data onto DNA, or even re-engineer the very building blocks of human life itself, you'd probably tell me that I'm crazy. And to a certain extent, you would be right, because whilst it's never happened in the past, the same can be said of aeroplanes. And until somebody invented the aeroplane and flew first, it had never happened. You see, this all means that it is conceivable that we could be living in an age where where innovation occurs every day, where something as profound as the internet occurs every day. So what will our jobs look like? And how should we begin to think about iTrend when innovation is every day? Now, I think we need to think about two main things to really get to grips and get better at being able to adapt to the coming changes. So the first is to ask ourselves, how does innovation actually occur? And then the second is, what big changes could be just around the corner that would reshape our world as we know it? So back in 1908, the Washington Post ran an article where they interviewed Thomas Edison, the inventor of the light bulb. The Post asked Edison a very simple question. Is the age of invention passing? Passing? He repeated. Why, it hasn't even begun yet. That ought to answer your question. Do you want anything else? You believe then that the next 50 years will see as great a mechanical and scientific revolution as what we've just had? Greater, much greater, he responded. Along what lines do you expect this change to happen? Along all lines. You see, Thomas Edison understood that inventions usually begin life with an attempt to solve a very specific problem. But once they get into circulation, they end up triggering other changes that would have been extremely difficult to predict. An innovation or cluster of innovations in one field ends up triggering changes that seem to belong to a different domain altogether. You see, innovation is not predictive or linear. Big breakthroughs don't happen on their own. They're a conglomeration of small discoveries, an unforeseen part of talent leveraging itself off of other talent, often in multiple industries and multiple eras. For example, I think we're all familiar with Amazon. Amazon is one of the most innovative companies for the sole reason that Jeff Bezos has set up the company to avoid bureaucracy and get better at adapting to changing customer goals and needs at speed. Now the Fire Phone, for all intents and purposes, those that remember the story, was a failure. It cost hundreds of millions of dollars and thousands of employees man-hours. But what most don't know was that the very technology that was used to differentiate this Fire Phone, the voice technology inside of it, was later put into the Amazon Echo, a device that many people didn't know they actually wanted. Perdón. You see, a little bit of creativity and innovation begets necessity. Innovation is, as a law, is iterative, much like Kurzweil's law of accelerating return. But there is also another law, and that is that necessity is the mother of all invention. So what big changes could be brewing just around the corner that could necessitate innovation and change on such a scale? I think that there are 4 big changes that will affect us on a level as profound as the internet. And while we'll learn a lot from the ways that consumers adapt to these changes, we're going to be responsible for shaping consumers' perspective around them too. You see, these 4 changes, these 4 things, will be as profound and it will have as profound an impact on innovation, technology, and society as World War II, the mother of all invention this past century. You see, World War II was a catalyst of monumental proportions. Penicillin owes its existence to the war, so do radar, jets, nuclear energy, rockets, and helicopters. The civil rights movement, perhaps the most important social and political event of our time, began in earnest with racial integration during the war. The female labor force grew by 6.5 million during the war, because women were needed in the factories. Most kept working after the war ended, beginning a trend that led to the doubling of the female participation in the workforce by 1990. It's probably the single most important economic event of our lifetime. So the first big change the internet is a big change because it has democratized access to information, allowing people of all classes and regions to access the same information. You see, what's happened over the last 20 years, and especially the last 10, has no historical precedent. The telephone eliminated the gap between you and a close relative. The internet has eliminated the gap between you and every stranger on the planet. You see, this is important because the medium through which we communicate dictates our behavior. We have radically new formats and mediums through which to communicate and experience reality. I think this is a really interesting example. The New York Public Library uploaded full works of long-form fiction to Instagram stories, known for its fast and fleeting posts about night on the town. You see, the Insta Novels project they created together quickly proved to be a publicity coup for the library. It saw its follower base increase by 155,000, roughly about 75%. You see, this is not a new use for the internet. We take content from one place and put it into another place every day. We're creating more stuff than ever before. And we're sharing more stuff than ever before too. This means that we're creating more information every day than ever before. The entire digital universe is expected to increase by reach 44 zettabytes by 2020. If this number is true, it means that there are 40 times more bytes than there are observable stars in the universe. And all of this information comes at a cost. The storage space, cloud data storage space, requires tremendous energy. Our cloud service uses more energy than the entire airline industry. It uses more energy than the entire country of Austria. The other problem is physical space. There is no way we can keep building these huge data centers, especially when we know how much energy they cost. And the third is the materials that they use to create the hardware through which you actually store the data has a life of about 30 years. It's degrading. So what we need is really a radical new solution, something that pushes the boundaries, that really enters into science fiction. Now this is Catalog. This is Catalog's solution.
The system is basically a printer, but instead of an ink, it uses DNA.
The machine really starts with this plastic webbing. And so the webbing starts to unwind. The first place it goes is a module that we call the print engine. And a series of print heads dispense small droplets of liquid that contain the DNA. And you have multiple DNA components or parts being added to one spot, one little droplet on this plastic sheet.
So each dot on the webbing corresponds to a specific set of bytes in your original data.
So those dots, we're creating 600,000 of them every second.
And then we add a reaction mixture that contains the enzyme that hooks all of the DNA parts together.
And so then the plastic sheet moves into this large chamber. It's like they go into the sun, they get heated up, and then they go into this cold bath. And that's the place where all of the DNA that you have just stitched together drops off the plastic and can be collected in this large pool of liquid. That becomes our DNA library.
And the Wikipedia.
And then we'll take this solution, clean it up.
So we get it down to under a milliliter.
It will contain all the information.
And now that we're able to store a terabit in DNA, this opens up a lot of possibilities of what can then be done in terms of computing.
With DNA computing, you could take your entire data center, put it into one pellet, take hundreds of such pellets, and operate on all of them in parallel.
Now, I don't know about you, but that seems like science fiction. But the thing is, it's happening right now. And it's not just these industries that are changing. We're seeing across all industries change of this magnitude. Not just digital disruption, but biological disruption. The ability to print data onto DNA is crazy. The second big change is demographics. Well, see, demographics is a big thing because it could reconfigure modern economies. You see, here's what's happening. In 1960, there were 3 times as many Americans aged 0 to 4 than there were aged 70 to 74. By 2060, these groups are about even. The share of young workers is declining while the share of old workers is rising. Fewer babies is a big thing because it means that as the population ages, and when the population ages, everything from economic growth to workplace culture to the global order of nations gets shaken up. You see, here's what's happened over the last 30 years. And here's what's predicted to happen over the next 30 years. You see, it's hard to overstate how big of a deal this is. When people talk about the nation that will have the greatest competitive advantage, they point to China, a company which has a huge, looks to have a huge competitive advantage in AI and machine learning. But it's staggeringly difficult to grow an economy when you lose 1/5 of your working class population, working age population, in just one generation. It means that the United States' competitiveness increases relative to most of the rest of the world. See, lower birth rates are a global phenomenon, particularly in the developed world. And while America ages, and the rest of the world's major economies turn into a Florida retirement community, population growth in many cases is on track to turn negative. You see, immigration is the natural solution to a decrease in working age population. However, it is seen increasingly as a negative thing. Brands have attempted to tackle this issue themselves, challenging the United States immigration policy, challenging the status quo, and trying to create a conversation around the roles brands should and shouldn't play. Log 84 and Budweiser, pictured, both released Super Bowl adverts condemning the US's immigration policy and highlighting how beneficial immigration can be to national economies and the creation of brands and economic growth. You see, the United States was actually built by immigrants. They have been shown to be better educated and entrepreneurial. They make up roughly 13% of America's population, but 27.5% of entrepreneurs. So how can we start to talk about immigration and challenge these huge issues moving forward? How should we be talking about immigration if immigration is off of the planet? See, this is Shackleton Energy solving one of the biggest issues that comes with trying to travel into space.
People are seeing it regularly in the Washington Post, the New York Times, all of the other papers. There's water on the moon. What does that mean?
The component gases of water, hydrogen and oxygen, when converted to a liquid form, is the most powerful chemical propellant we know of. In fact, the space shuttle main engines use liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen.
One corporation plans to mine the moon's water and deliver it to a fuel station in Earth orbit.
If you work from the moon by using very carefully defined, optimized procedures, you can reduce the cost of getting raw materials to Earth orbit by a factor of up to 20 to 1. So it's inevitable that if the fuel is there, people are going to buy it.
Once we've got a good transport infrastructure in place and we can begin to exploit the resources of the moon, then bringing lunar oxygen into low Earth orbit to fuel all of the activities, that's a major breakthrough. The consequence of that is that the missions that we can consider will be on a scale which I think defies imagination at this point in time.
A resupply station in Earth orbit would be a stepping stone into deep space.
Low Earth orbit is the first stopping point you have in space to go anywhere in space. The process of getting there is half the job of getting to anywhere in the universe.
Several companies are already marketing services outside our orbit, including mining for precious minerals on nearby asteroids. And government space agencies and private companies alike are currently drawing up plans for travel to Mars.
To get to Mars, you're going to need a spacecraft in the 700-ton region. There's no way you can launch that in one piece. It's got to be launched in pieces. It's got to be launched cost-effectively.
One company suggests sending robots to build settlements so humans arrive with a place to stay. All of this creativity in the private sector can be traced back to NASA's pedigree of groundbreaking work.
NASA have spent 50 years inventing the technologies that never existed before. We are the beneficiaries of all of that hard sweat and work. They have made possible what can now be done by private enterprise. That's really what this is all about.
See, demographics is a big thing. But we could be talking about reconfiguring global economies, not just national economies. And if you think this is science fiction, this is crazy, let's just remember that one eccentric billionaire has already sent his personal car into space. You see, what once crippled a world superpower is now the pastime of a few extravagant billionaires. The third big thing is climate change. Climate change is a big thing because we're already 60% over the world's productive capabilities. And we're expected to add another 2 billion people by 2040. I think we are all aware of the dangers of climate change. We simply cannot continue at our current rate. You see, we only have 55 harvests left. Concern around climate change has increased significantly over the last decade. Brands are now starting to enter the conversation. Unilever, one of the world's largest brands and one of the world's largest users of single-use plastic, has pledged to halve its plastic usage by 2025, from 700,000 tons down to 350,000 tons. But reducing usage isn't enough. We also have to start thinking about removing it from the world's oceans and recycling it. So how do you raise awareness of these things? What can you do, and what role should we be playing in promoting the conversation? What content should we be producing? Well, this is a rather risque example, but this is Pornhub couple Leo Lulu. You see, they used their reach and awareness to raise money around the world, around this issue. In collaboration with Pornhub, they filmed a movie on a litter-filled beach to remove plastic from the world's ocean. For every time this video is watched, Pornhub donates to Ocean Polymers, a charity dedicated to removing plastic from the world's oceans. See, another really interesting example of people using the internet to draw attention to the problems and solutions around climate change is Mr. Beast. This is a popular YouTuber who collaborated with other popular YouTubers to plant 20 million trees by working with teamtrees.org. You see, it's a fantastic way of leveraging our current technology, in this case, the internet, to draw attention to the solutions. And they're well on their way to planting 20 million trees. I took this screenshot on Monday. I don't know where they're at now. And I don't want to belittle this achievement. It's a huge achievement, but 20 million trees is just a scratch on the surface. You see, ecologist Thomas Crowther argues that to eliminate a decade's worth of our own climate emissions, we would need to plant over 1 trillion trees. We currently have 3 trillion trees on our planet. It doesn't look like it's going to be possible to plant another couple of trillion just to resolve the centuries worth of emissions that we've produced. You see, it's not feasible. What we need is a radical new solution. What we need are trees that could be capable of sucking up over 1 million times the CO2 of current trees. Let me introduce to you Ginkgo Bioworks.
Inside this advanced foundry, biologists, software engineers, and a fleet of automated robots are working side by side to crank up the speed of nature. They're taking synthetic DNA, remixing it, and programming microorganisms, turning these living samples into mini factories that could one day pump out new foods, fuels, and medicines. Every piece of DNA here is barcoded and cataloged in what's considered the world's largest genetically engineered strain bank. This biological assembly line is at the heart of an emerging field that's raising billions of dollars and attracting a ton of attention: synthetic biology.
We are surrounded by biology. It's personal care products. It's the clothes we wear in form of cotton and hemp. It's the houses we live in. It's gasoline. It's medicine. And because biology isn't everything, if we have the power to engineer biology, we have the power to affect every single aspect of our life.
You see, Ginkgo Bioworks are creating technology that could redefine what it means to be a human being. This isn't science fiction. We're already seeing companies marketing and building lab-grown meat. But this presents an incredible opportunity for us as marketers. You see, according to the Pew Research Center, whilst 88% of scientists say that lab-grown meat, GMO food, is safe to eat, only 37% of the public think so. This means that if Ginkgo Bioworks continues to produce bioengineered products at a mass scale, the concern and safety surrounding GMO foods will undoubtedly follow. There is a massive opportunity for marketers to help educate and raise awareness to challenge the status quo around these new technologies. The problem here isn't a problem of identifying trends, it's a problem of solving real human problems. It's a case of using science to tackle humanity's problems. You see, our job will be to communicate the value around these unimaginable new technologies so that consumers are no longer blinded by the biases that stop them from seeing the true value of these technologies. These technologies built on synthetic biology. This is one of my favorite examples. This is a synthetic nose. This technology is capable of detecting explosives and cancer cells. You stick it on a wall, and it is capable of predicting asthma attacks and calculating all of the pathogens in the air. You see, the inventor of this technology wants to stick it in every single person's home. You imagine an Amazon Echo, but for all of your other senses. Now, I don't know about you, but whilst this seems all very incredibly complex, it's also incredibly exciting. An opportunity to challenge what it means to be us, to challenge our own reality, our own imagination about what is possible, to latch on to big ideas that will help us redefine the way we see the world itself. Now, inequality is a big thing. It has grown for 4 decades, and it's currently at its highest point. The greatest, in the 10 years since the financial crisis, the number of billionaires has doubled. The world's Bill Gates is now the richest man again, but when I wrote this, it was Jeff Bezos. Jeff Bezos' fortune is currently 112 billion. 1% of his wealth is the equivalent of the entire health budget of Ethiopia, a country with 105 million people. You see, the richest 26 people on the world own 50% of the world's wealth. We've already seen a radical redistribution of wealth back in the Gilded Ages, where tax rates went from effectively 0% to 94%. And people are already voting there and protesting their discontent. Brexit, Trump, Bernie, Bolivia, France, Libya. Change is upon us. But the thing is, if Ginkgo Bioworks continues at its current rate, it is not inconceivable to imagine a future in which everybody has every basic need accounted for. We're talking about a completely redefined Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It would mean that wealth as we know it is redefined. I mean, what does it mean to be rich when everybody has every biological need they need catered for? And if you think it's far-fetched and crazy to redistribute wealth, to redefine what it means to be wealthy, just remember that access to the internet wasn't considered a basic human right until it was. With enough change and impetus, we can drive these changes in perception across the world. And with all of these unbelievable technologies, we're on the cusp of an explosion that could be more profound than the internet. I think the question is, what can we do as marketers? And what should we be doing? You see, over the last century, there has been no industry greater at changing public perception than the advertising industry. Advertising has the power to fundamentally change the status quo, to change how people see the world and to really drive change forwards, change to drive progress. And I want to demonstrate this with 3 marketing strategies that I think we're all probably quite familiar with. See, this is Dove's Real Beauty campaign. This is an iconic example of brands taking a stand, a leading cultural dialogue around the shaping of public perception around healthy body images and new ideals of beauty that are more positive. See, not only did this drive an increase of brand equity by 256%, but it changed the way girls perceive their body image. Another example is United Colors of Benetton. For 18 years, Toscani, in conjunction with Benetton, pushed the limits of advertising. With each new campaign they produced came a new round of backlash and censorship, and a hefty amount of press. You see, this advert suggests an interracial, homosexual couple at a time where there were no images of such things. Most images of lesbian relationships at this time and today have been incredibly fetishized and sexualized. They achieved global fame by constantly challenging our status quo of what was and what isn't acceptable. Another famous example is De Beers' The Diamond Forever campaign. You see, this campaign has firmly entrenched in the public minds of everybody, all of us here today, that love can be quantified. 2 months' salary is what is now widely accepted as the amount that you spend on a diamond ring, despite the fact that the second you leave the jeweler's store, it leaves half of its value. You see, we have so much potential to change behavior, to challenge the status quo, and to push people's imagination to places where it wasn't before. We are going to have the opportunity to shape people's behavior and perception around these technologies. See, what we need is a new way of seeing the world. Because if we continue following the status quo and following conventional thinking, we'll end up doing and believing in conventional stories. These are two fantastic examples of the last couple of years of people telling a story and others not doing their due diligence and following and just believing it to be the case. I'm sure we're all familiar with the WeWork example. If we're unfamiliar with the one on the right, that's Theranos, a lady who is currently in prison for fraud. You see, we need a new way of seeing the world. Future literacy is about developing the skills needed to expand our own imagination so that we can adapt to the changes. You see, the point of future literacy is to become more adept at inventing imaginary futures to use and detect and invent the changes in the conditions of change itself, to rethink the assumptions that we use to analyze the present. You see, the emphasis is on the imaginary. We need to use the future to question, to unpack, to invent what is going on and what is doable now. We need to break our biases and look in new places where we didn't think change was possible. By challenging our own assumptions and challenging the status quo of everybody around us, we can do things that we previously considered impossible. And I think a fantastic example of this is sports. You see, when we cut ties with our biases and learn to adapt to a future in creative and innovative and more exciting ways, we find that there are fantastic new places for us to grow. And this, when I play it, is a clip from my favorite film, Moneyball. For those unfamiliar with it, Billy Beane, the general manager of Oakland A's, won the title using a new way of evaluating the value of players, and in the process completely redefined what it means to put a team together.
Hey, Billy?
Billy? Can we talk?
Yeah. Yeah. You're unhappy, Grady. Why?
Wow. May I speak candidly?
Sure, go ahead.
Major League Baseball and its fans, they're gonna be more than happy to throw you and Google Boy under the bus if you keep doing what you're doing here. You don't put a team together with a computer, Billy.
No?
No. Baseball isn't just numbers. It's not science. If it was, then anybody could do what we're doing, but they can't because they don't know what we know. They don't have our experience and they don't have our intuition.
Okay.
Billy, you got a kid in there that's got a degree in economics from Yale. You got a scout here with 29 years of baseball experience. You're listening to the wrong one. Now, there are intangibles that only baseball people understand. You're discounting what scouts have done for 150 years, even yourself.
Adapt or die.
This is about you and your shit, isn't it? 20 years ago, some scout got it wrong.
Whoa. Okay.
Now you're gonna declare war on the whole system.
Okay, my turn. You don't have a crystal ball. You can't look at a kid and predict his future any more than I can. I've sat at those kitchen tables with you and listened to you tell those parents, when I know, I know. And when it comes to your son, I know. And you don't. You don't.
Well, a second example of a team radically redefining what it means to evaluate player valuation and find talent where there wasn't previously considered to be talent is the Toronto Raptors. First team to take the NBA title out of America in 73 years. How did they do it? Well, they hired IBM Watson and IBM Blue to put together an AI platform capable of evaluating players and potential acquisitions in very time-sensitive situations. The next step is to put together, to use the AI to evaluate the health and nutrition of the players to turn them into their even better selves. The third example is my baby. This is Liverpool. Liverpool have one of the most Liverpool have one of the most extraordinary teams of data scientists. They have a physicist, who calculated that the world would not end when they fired two particles together in the Hadron Collider. You see, it goes to show if you look in new places and test the old status quo, the old limits of what was conceived possible, you can find value where there was no previously considered value. You see, the problems we face, that the point of these examples and the whole point of this talk is to show you that if you use your imagination and look in places where other people are not looking, you'll find tremendous value. You'll be able to create unbelievable solutions to problems that you may or may not know you actually had. You see, the problems we face are many and unexpected, and the thing is, we have more information, greater technology, and more creatives than ever before. You see, it's never been a better time to be a marketer. The far future is coming soon, and we need to get a little bit better at thinking different. And I think there is no better campaign out there, one that's got a close place in my heart, than this one. Whoa, hombre. Christian.
Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs in the square holes, the ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules, and they have no respect for the status quo. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them. About the only thing you can't do is ignore them. Because they change things. They push the human race forward. And while some may see them as the crazy ones, we see genius. Because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do.
Gracias.
¿Alguna pregunta?